The poor dog had been abandoned by a cruel, cowardly family. But a few weeks later, a miracle happened that left everyone speechless. You know what's the worst part of having it all? Christian thought as he gazed out from the massive window of his mansion. The answer was always the same: emptiness. For as long as he could remember, he'd been surrounded by luxury, latest model cars, fine furniture, and art pieces he didn't even understand. But what was the point of it all if at the end of the day there was no one to share it with? His house, though impressive, felt like a cold, silent cave, full of echoes that haunted him on those long nights. At 55, Christian couldn't complain about the material success he'd achieved, but the loneliness slowly ate away at him. His friends only showed up when there was an invite to some fancy event or when they needed a favor they could cash in later. His family, well, they only came around to talk about money. "You're lucky to have so much," they'd say sometimes. But luck was the last thing Christian felt. One afternoon, tired of the monotony, he decided to go for a walk. It was one of those days when the air felt fresher and the sky seemed less grey. Maybe it was just the relief of being out of those suffocating four walls. He wandered aimlessly until his steps took him to the park just a few blocks from his house. He wasn't expecting anything special, just some distraction. It was there, among the green trees and the distant sound of children playing, that he saw it. A golden-coated dog darted back and forth, full of boundless energy. Its tail wagged side to side as if it were the happiest creature in the world. It was a golden retriever, dirty and clearly without an owner, but its joy was unmistakable. It stopped to sniff every flower, bark at the birds, and roll in the grass without a care in the world. Christian watched for a few moments, fascinated. How could a dog with nothing seem so full of life? So happy? Its name, he found out minutes later, was Achilles. A group of kids had named him that because, according to them, he was an unstoppable warrior who never gave up. Achilles, hearing the kids call out his name, trotted over with his tongue hanging out and an expression of pure joy. For the first time in what felt like ages, Christian smiled. Something about that dog moved him deeply. It was as if everything he had lost, the spark of happiness, was concentrated in that stray animal. "Maybe money isn't what I need," he muttered quietly to himself. Achilles, as if sensing his thoughts, suddenly approached. He sat right in front of Christian, wagging his tail excitedly, looking straight into his eyes. "You don't have an owner, do you?" Christian murmured, almost expecting an answer. The dog tilted his head, as if he understood. Christian sighed and gently scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth and softness of his fur against his hand. In that moment, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Bringing Achilles home was almost an impulsive act. But once the two crossed the threshold of the mansion, everything changed. The house, once so silent and cold, began to feel alive. Achilles raced through the wide hallways, exploring every nook and cranny, and his presence filled the empty spaces Christian hadn't even realized were there. Each morning, the dog woke him up with a soft bark, almost as if telling him it was time to start the day with enthusiasm. Christian, who had once felt trapped in a monotonous routine, now had something that kept him active, motivated. Achilles' company also brought something unexpected: peace. The nights, which had once felt long and lonely, were now filled with quiet moments. Christian and Achilles would sit by the fireplace together, the dog resting at his feet while Christian read or simply watched the flames. "This is the kind of happiness I've always needed," Christian thought as he stroked his loyal companion. One day, while playing with Achilles in the garden, Christian felt a sharp pain in his chest, something different, deep, that made him stop in his tracks. He had been ignoring these twinges for weeks, thinking it was just stress or exhaustion, but that day was different. The pain took his breath away. Achilles, always alert to his owner's movements, quickly ran over, wagging his tail with concern. "Don't worry, buddy. I just need to catch my breath," Christian muttered, bending over his knees, trying to regain his air. Achilles licked his hand, as if to make sure everything was okay, but Christian knew something wasn't right. The following weeks were a blur of doctor visits and endless tests. Finally, the news came, a devastating diagnosis. The doctor looked at him with that serious expression reserved for the worst of circumstances. "Christian, we need to talk seriously." The doctor paused, searching for the right words. "It's a serious illness, and we need to start treatment immediately." Christian remained silent. It felt as if the weight of the world had fallen on his shoulders. He had spent so many years building his life, his fortune, believing that money would provide him with security and control. And now, not all the gold in the world could save him from his own frailty. The real blow came shortly after his diagnosis, when his family, who rarely visited him, started showing up with surprising frequency. At first, Christian thought maybe they were worried about his health. But over time, the conversations shifted away from his well-being and more toward what would happen next. Questions about his will and the management of his businesses started to surface, masked under a false concern. One day, his nephew Martin, who hadn't shown any interest in him for years, visited him in the hospital. Christian, weak from the treatments, looked at him from the bed, noticing how Martin avoided direct eye contact. "Uncle, I just want to help you manage things," Martin said with a forced smile. "You should be resting, not worrying about the business. I'll take care of everything. You just need to sign these documents so things can keep running smoothly." Christian took the papers with trembling hands, but something inside him lit up. Achilles, who never left his side, was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, watching everything closely. The dog, as always, seemed to understand what Christian couldn't express in words. "Why the rush, Martin?" Christian asked, not taking his eyes off the papers. "It's almost like you're more worried about the money than about me." Martin let out a nervous laugh, but didn't answer directly. Christian stared at him for a few moments before letting the documents fall onto the table beside him. "I'm not signing anything without talking to my lawyer first." Martin tensed up. That visit, which had started with a facade of concern, quickly revealed its true intention. His words became sharper, colder. "Uncle, don't make this difficult. You know you're alone. No one else is going to take care of this for you. Your dog isn't going to save you," he said, with a sarcastic tone, glancing at Achilles, who remained still, but with his gaze fixed on Martin. Achilles let out a low growl, as if he perfectly understood the disdain in Martin's words. Christian felt a knot form in his stomach, not from the words, but from the truth behind them. He was alone. He had always been alone. But now, with his illness, that loneliness felt even heavier. His family didn't care about him. Not really. They only cared about what he had. In the days that followed, his family's visits continued, all with the same purpose. But Martin's words echoed in his mind. "No one else is going to take care of this for you." The physical pain was bearable, but the emotional pain, the betrayal, plunged him into a sadness he couldn't ignore. He started to doubt everything and everyone. His nights, once peaceful with Achilles by his side, turned into long hours of insomnia and dark thoughts. What was the value of everything he had built if, in the end, no one loved him for who he was? The only creature that seemed to genuinely care for him was that dog, that loyal companion who had never left his side, not even in the darkest moments. Achilles didn't understand what was happening. He had spent entire days waiting by the mansion door, looking out the window, expecting Christian to return as he always did. But Christian wasn't coming back, and the house, once filled with his soft laughter and the sound of his calm footsteps, was now empty and cold. The silence was broken one morning by the sound of a car pulling up in front of the mansion. Achilles, hearing the noise, ran to the door, wagging his tail excitedly, hoping it was his owner. But it wasn't Christian. It was two men, relatives of Christian, who entered the house without showing any affection for the dog, who anxiously waited for a pet, a gesture, anything to tell him that everything was okay. But those men didn't even bother to look at him. Achilles followed them as they moved through the rooms, muttering to each other about papers, money, and things the dog couldn't understand. One of the men turned to the other and said in a low voice, but loud enough for Achilles to hear, "The dog's a nuisance. Why keep him? It'd be best to get rid of him." Achilles didn't know what those words meant, but his instincts told him something was wrong. The day dragged on slowly, and by nightfall, the same men led him out of the house. There were no words of comfort, no kind looks. They put him in a car, drove him far away, and left him on a dark, empty street he didn't recognize. Confused, the dog stood in the middle of the road, watching as the car's lights faded into the distance. He didn't understand why he had been abandoned. The cold night wrapped around him, and the distant sounds of the city made him feel even more alone. Achilles, used to the warmth of home and Christian's love, was now lost in a world that felt completely unfamiliar. He started walking with no clear direction, but in his heart, he knew there was only one place he wanted to go: back to Christian. No matter how far away or how difficult the journey might be, his loyalty pushed him to keep going. It was as if every step brought him a little closer to the man who had loved him so much. In the following days, Achilles faced the harshness of life on the streets. The nights were freezing, and the ground where he lay was never as soft or warm as the rug in front of the mansion's fireplace. Sometimes he found a corner to shield himself from the wind, but most of the time he wandered aimlessly, never finding rest. Cars sped by, and the people walking the streets barely noticed him, as if he were invisible. Hunger soon became a constant struggle. Achilles, once fed lovingly by Christian, now rummaged through trash or waited for a kind soul to toss him a scrap of food. One day, while trying to approach a food stand, a man chased him away, hitting him on the back with a stick, leaving a small bruise. Achilles whimpered softly but didn't give up. Despite the growing pain in his body and the deep sadness in his heart, the image of Christian kept him going. The street was full of dangers. One time, a group of teenagers saw him and, for fun, started chasing him. Achilles ran as fast as he could, weaving through cars until he finally lost them in a dark alley. Panting and frightened, he hid behind some garbage bins. His body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the fear still running through him. Yet even in those terrifying moments, the thought of Christian gave him strength. It had been more than a week since he was abandoned. His paws were covered in mud and small cuts, but he didn't stop. Every time he heard the sound of a car approaching, he raised his head hopefully, expecting to see Christian. But he never did. The road was tough and the city was unforgiving, but Achilles refused to give up. One afternoon, while walking along a busy street, The sky began to cloud over. Soon, the rain started to fall and quickly turned into a storm. The water soaked through his fur, and the cold pierced his bones. Still, Achilles didn't seek shelter. He kept walking in the rain, ignoring the cold, hunger, and thirst, driven by one desire: to go home, to be with Christian again. The storm raged that night. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain came down in thick sheets over the city. In the middle of the chaos, Achilles could barely see the road ahead of him. His paws slipped on the wet pavement, and exhaustion slowly overtook him. Despite everything, he kept moving forward, clinging to a hope that refused to die. Suddenly, as he passed under a small bridge, the cold and fatigue finally got the best of him. Achilles curled up against a damp wall, seeking temporary shelter. His body shook not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion of days spent searching. He closed his eyes for a moment, hoping the storm would pass, wishing with every fiber of his being to be back in Christian's arms. It was then that a soft light surrounded him. A figure appeared, leaning toward him with a gentle, calm voice. "Poor thing," a woman murmured, almost to herself. "What are you doing here, all alone in this storm?" Scarlett, a woman in her 50s with a heart as big as the sky, couldn't ignore the sight of the soaked, vulnerable dog sitting in the rain. It was clear he was lost, but what moved her most was the sadness in his eyes. Without thinking twice, she pulled an old towel from her bag, something she always carried for emergencies, and knelt to wrap it around Achilles. "Don't worry, boy. I'll take care of you," she said, gently stroking his head. Achilles, feeling the warmth of the blanket and the kindness of this stranger, didn't resist. Even though he could barely move from exhaustion, deep in his heart he knew that, at least for now, he was safe. Scarlett carefully led him to her car, shielding him from the storm as she placed him in the back seat. On the way home, Scarlett kept speaking to him softly, as if he could understand every word. "You got such sad eyes, little guy," she said while driving. "I wonder what you've been through to end up like this. But you're not alone anymore, you know? I'm taking you home. I'll feed you and let you rest." Achilles closed his eyes, trusting that kind voice, letting exhaustion take over. That night, for the first time since he'd been abandoned, he slept deeply, certain that he wasn't alone anymore. When they arrived at her home, Scarlett took him inside, drying him off with more towels and settling him next to a small heater she kept running on cold nights. She gave him a plate of leftover chicken and bread, which Achilles devoured with a mix of hunger and gratitude. "You must have been starving, poor thing," she murmured, watching him eat. Over the next few days, Scarlett devoted herself to caring for Achilles. She took him to the vet to make sure he wasn't seriously hurt, cleaned his fur, and gave him the attention he so desperately needed. But one thing continued to worry her. Achilles always had that lost look, like he was searching for someone. Despite being in a warm, safe place, he seemed restless, and every time someone walked by the house, he'd run to the door waiting for something or someone. One afternoon, as she stroked him in silence, Scarlett couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "Who are you waiting for, huh?" she whispered, looking into those sad eyes that seemed to tell a story she didn't yet know. That's when she decided to dig deeper. Scarlett was a determined woman, and though she didn't know much about technology, she used her computer to try and find out more about Achilles' past. She started searching on social media, animal rescue groups, and lost dog pages. She posted photos of him, asking if anyone recognized him. Days went by without any response, but Scarlett didn't give up. Finally, one afternoon, she received a private message. It was from a lawyer who worked at a local firm. The message was brief, but revealing. "Hello. I believe the dog you found belongs to a man named Christian. He's one of our clients, and he's been looking for his dog for weeks. Christian is gravely ill in the hospital, and his family has isolated him. If you'd like, I can provide more details." Scarlett read the message several times, trying to take it all in. Now she understood why Achilles seemed so sad and desperate. The poor dog hadn't just been abandoned, he was separated from the person he loved most in the world. Christian, his owner, was seriously ill, and that thought made Scarlett's heart ache. "So, your name's Achilles, and you have someone who loves you," she murmured, stroking his head. "Don't worry, boy. We're going to get you back to him." Scarlett didn't waste any time. That very afternoon, she contacted Christian's lawyer to arrange the visit to the hospital. She knew the reunion wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to get Achilles back to his owner. She prepared a soft blanket to cover the dog and settled him into the back seat of her car, speaking to him in a calm voice. "Come on, Achilles. Today's the day. Today, you're going to see Christian again." Achilles, as if understanding every word, looked at her with eyes full of both anxiety and hope. Throughout the drive, he stayed still, but Scarlett noticed how he occasionally let out soft whimpers, as if he were anticipating what was to come. Deep in his heart, she knew, the dog still remembered the warmth of Christian's arms and the safety of his home. When they arrived at the hospital, a soft cold wind blew, and Scarlett gently took hold of Achilles' collar, guiding him with firm but gentle steps. The hospital was overwhelming for the dog. The sounds of ambulances, the automatic doors, the bright lights. It all seemed to confuse him. But Achilles pressed on, his initial hesitation turning into more determined steps as they neared the entrance. Christian's lawyer was waiting for them in the lobby, a serious-looking man but with compassionate eyes. "Ms. Scarlett, everything is ready. Christian doesn't know Achilles is here. We wanted it to be a surprise." Scarlett nodded, giving him a grateful smile. "Thank you, truly. I think this will give him some strength." With her heart racing, they walked through the hospital hallways. Achilles, though nervous, followed Scarlett's lead. But when they reached Christian's room, something changed. The dog stopped, planting his paws firmly on the ground. His entire body trembled, as if a cloud of doubts suddenly surrounded him. Scarlett knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "Come on, Achilles. Don't be scared. He needs you." But Achilles didn't move. His eyes, filled with uncertainty, stared at the closed door, as if behind it lay an uncertain fate. What if Christian had forgotten him? What if everything they had shared was now in the past? Time and distance could weaken even the strongest bond. At least that's what Achilles seemed to be thinking in that moment. Scarlett, understanding the doubt that clouded his heart, didn't rush him. She stayed by his side, giving him time to find the courage to move forward. She knew that Achilles' love for Christian was still there, unchanged, and all he needed was a small push to overcome his fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Achilles took a step forward. A small movement, but one that meant everything. Scarlett smiled, stood up, and with a gentle touch on the door handle, opened the door. Christian's room was small and simple, with white walls and soft light filtering through the curtains. He lay in bed, his eyes closed, his body thin and pale, a reflection of the illness weighing him down. Beside him was a small table cluttered with medications and papers, likely things he had been going through before falling asleep. At the sound of the door opening, Christian slowly opened his eyes, a look of weariness on his face. He wasn't expecting visitors at that hour, much less the visit that was about to change his life. As his eyes landed on the doorway, he saw a sight that took his breath away. There stood Achilles, frozen at the threshold, staring at him with the same intensity and devotion he'd always had since the first day. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Neither Scarlett nor the lawyer said a word. Everything went silent, as if the whole universe was waiting for what would happen next. Achilles, his heart racing, finally broke through the barrier of doubt. He ran toward Christian with all his strength, jumping up onto the bed, and, without hesitation, placed his paws on Christian's chest, licking his face with overwhelming energy. Christian, unable to hold back his tears, wrapped his trembling arms around his dog. The sobs broke the silence as his hands stroked Achilles' wet fur, recognizing the warmth, the life he had missed so much. It was as if, in that moment, all the sadness, fear, and despair that had plagued him throughout his illness melted away. "Achilles," he whispered through his tears, "I thought I'd lost you forever." Achilles, just as overjoyed, wagged his tail wildly, his eyes brimming with pure happiness that seemed to touch everyone in the room. Scarlett watched the scene from the doorway, her heart swelling and a smile on her lips. She knew she was witnessing something deeply special, something that words couldn't fully capture. It wasn't just a reunion between a man and his dog. It was a reunion with life itself, with the hope Christian thought he had lost. Achilles settled peacefully at the foot of the bed, as if knowing that his mere presence was enough to bring Christian a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. Christian, for the first time in a long time, rested with the comforting knowledge that he wasn't alone, that there was someone worth fighting for. However, that calm didn't last long. The next day, while Christian was enjoying the quiet company of Achilles, the sound of the hospital door bursting open interrupted the peace. Martin, his nephew, barged in with an expression that tried to convey concern, but was betrayed by the frustration and urgency in his eyes. "Uncle, I came because there are urgent matters we need to take care of," Martin said, not even acknowledging Achilles, who eyed him warily from the corner of the room. Christian watched him silently, feeling a slight discomfort in his stomach. He knew his nephew didn't have good intentions, and his sudden presence only confirmed Christian's suspicions. But Martin pressed on with his agenda, opening a briefcase and pulling out a stack of documents. "I need you to sign these papers as soon as possible," Martin said as he approached the bed. "It's about managing your businesses. You know, with everything that's happened, we can't let things spiral out of control." Christian looked at him intently, his eyes now sharper and clearer thanks to the strength he had regained after reuniting with Achilles. Despite his weakened state, he felt a renewed energy that allowed him to see through Martin's words. Something wasn't right. "What exactly am I supposed to be signing?" Christian asked in a calm but firm voice, reaching out his hand for the documents. Martin, surprised by his uncle's unexpected resistance, hesitated for a moment before responding. "Just some administrative matters, Uncle. Nothing to worry about." Christian took the papers and started to go through them carefully. His hands, though a bit shaky from the illness, turned page after page, and soon enough he found what he feared. Hidden clauses, cleverly buried between legal paragraphs, would give Martin full control over his properties and businesses, leaving Christian practically stripped of everything. "This isn't just an administrative matter, Martin," Christian said, looking up to face him. "This is an attempt to steal what's mine." Martin tensed. He knew his plan had been uncovered, but he wasn't ready to give up so easily. "Uncle, don't exaggerate," he replied nervously. "I'm just trying to help you. You're sick. You can't handle all this on your own. You have to trust me. Trust the family." Christian closed the papers with a sharp snap and dropped them on the table beside his bed. "Trust is something you earn, and you, Martin, lost it a long time ago. I'm not signing anything." Seeing that his initial strategy had failed, Martin switched tactics. His tone became more threatening. "Uncle, you know your health is at stake. You don't have time for complications. If you don't sign this, things could get worse for you. You could lose more than you think." But Christian wasn't alone. Scarlett, who had arrived moments earlier and had overheard the conversation from outside the room, decided it was time to step in. She opened the door and entered with firm steps, holding her phone in her hand. "He's not signing anything without a lawyer reviewing it first," she said, her voice calm but determined. Martin turned his head toward her, surprised and clearly irritated by the interruption. He hadn't expected to face anyone else. Aquiles, who had been quiet up until then, stood up and positioned himself beside Christian, as if he too were protecting him. "And who are you?" Martin asked, trying to keep his composure. "I'm someone who won't let you keep manipulating your uncle," Scarlett replied without hesitation. Christian looked at Scarlett with gratitude. He knew that in her he had found not just a friend, but an ally at this crucial moment. Martin, realizing his plan was falling apart, grabbed his papers hastily, casting one last defiant look. "This isn't over, Uncle," he said before rushing out of the room as abruptly as he had entered. Once the door closed, the tension in the room seemed to ease. Christian let out a deep sigh and leaned back against the pillows while Scarlett approached him. "Thank you," Christian said with a tired smile. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Scarlett smiled back. "You don't have to thank me. Aquiles and I will be here whenever you need us." Christian glanced at his dog, who had settled back down at the foot of the bed, and felt a comforting warmth fill him. Looking out the hospital window at the clear sky and hearing the soft song of birds in the garden, Christian was reminded of what truly mattered. The scene with Martin was behind him now, and though the tension still lingered in the air, Christian felt an unexpected sense of peace. He knew the time had come to make difficult decisions, and the most important one was to distance himself from the family that had betrayed him. He decided to leave behind that toxic environment where money had corrupted relationships and plunged him into a deep emptiness. He couldn't keep surrounding himself with people who only wanted to control his life and assets. Christian knew he needed to find a space where he could recover both physically and emotionally, a place where he could start over. That's when he thought about the house in the countryside, a property he had almost forgotten, far away from the noise of the city and the manipulations of his family. There, he could find the peace he so desperately needed, surrounded by nature and away from the ghosts of the past. Aquiles, who slept peacefully next to Christian's bed, seemed to sense his owner's calm. Reuniting with his loyal companion had been like a balm for his soul, and Christian knew the dog would be by his side during this new chapter of his life. Scarlett had also proven herself to be a loyal friend, someone he could fully trust. A few days later, the move to the countryside house was simple but filled with emotion. Scarlett had arranged everything to ensure that Christian could recover without any issues. They arrived on a sunny afternoon, with the wind gently rustling the trees. The house, surrounded by green fields and soft hills, radiated a serenity that Christian hadn't felt in a long time. Aquiles was the first to explore the new home. He ran from one corner to the next, sniffing every nook, jumping around the yard like a puppy. Seeing Aquiles so full of energy and joy made Christian smile in a way he hadn't in years. He knew that, in some way, both of them were finding a second chance in that place. Scarlett, for her part, had settled in comfortably. Over the days, she helped Christian establish a peaceful routine. Mornings began with gentle walks through the countryside, with Achilles running by their side, and afternoons were filled with long conversations on the porch, where the fresh air and evening light seemed to ease any troubling thoughts. Scarlett was a constant presence, always with a kind word, always ready to listen. As the weeks passed, Christian began to notice something more in his relationship with Scarlett. At first, it had been just gratitude for everything she had done for him and Achilles. But slowly, that gratitude transformed into something deeper. He started to realize how much he enjoyed her company, how her smile brightened his day, and how at peace he felt when they were together. One night, as the fire crackled softly in the hearth and warmth filled the room, Christian decided he couldn't keep those feelings to himself any longer. Scarlett was sitting next to him, holding a cup of tea, watching the flames dance. "Scarlett," Christian said gently, almost in a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, a mix of curiosity and tenderness in her eyes. "Since you came into my life, everything has changed. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope." He paused, searching for the right words. "You haven't just been my support during the darkest moments. You've brought light into my life in a way I never expected. And I think what I feel for you goes beyond simple friendship." Scarlett listened silently, her gaze fixed on Christian's, while a warm smile began to form on her lips. "Christian," she replied softly, "you don't know how long I've waited to hear that. The truth is, I feel the same way. From the moment I met you, I felt a special connection, and every day we've spent together has only made that feeling stronger. You and Achilles have given me a new purpose, a new life, and there's nothing I want more than to continue this journey together." Scarlett's words felt like a balm to Christian. They looked at each other in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of their confession settle into their hearts. Achilles, as if sensing the shift in the air, came over and rested his head on Christian's legs, reinforcing the feeling of unity between the three of them. In that instant, they knew they had formed something more than just a friendship. They had created a family. The days at the countryside house passed with a serenity that Christian had never experienced before. Achilles roamed freely through the gardens, exploring every corner with contagious joy, while Scarlett and Christian shared long walks in the surrounding nature, enjoying the quiet and each other's company. That tranquility, that sense of belonging, was something they both deeply cherished. As time went by, Christian couldn't help but reflect on everything he had been through and what fate had granted him in the past few months. His health, though still fragile, had improved thanks to Scarlett's constant support and Achilles' loyal presence. But more than his physical well-being, he felt a renewed energy to give his life deeper meaning. The days of loneliness and emptiness he had felt before now seemed like a distant memory. One morning, as he watched Achilles playing in the grass, an idea began to take shape in his mind. He remembered his own suffering when he had been separated from his dog, and how that reunion had given him a new purpose. He thought about how many other dogs, like Achilles, were out on the streets without a home, and how many people like him could find comfort in the unconditional love of an animal. "Scarlett," Christian said, interrupting the quiet breakfast they were sharing on the porch, "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days about everything that's happened and what really matters. Scarlett looked at him curiously, knowing that Christian had been reflecting in silence over the past few weeks. "I've decided I want to do something more with my life, something that's not about money or property, but about giving back what Achilles gave me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I want to use my resources to create a dog rescue organization, a place where we can save those who, like Achilles, were abandoned and forgotten. I want more people to feel the love these animals can offer." Scarlett smiled, touched by the idea. She knew Christian had a generous heart, and this decision not only showed how much he had changed, but also how much he had grown in his ability to love and care for others. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Christian," she responded. "You know I'll be by your side in this, for whatever you need. Animals have given us so much, and it would be beautiful to give them a home where they can heal and find love." Over the next few months, they spent time planning every detail of the organization. They decided to name the project Achilles House, in honor of the dog who had brought them together and given them both a second chance. The mission would not only be to rescue stray dogs, but also to offer a space where people, especially those living in loneliness or dealing with loss, could find companionship and comfort in these animals. The first shelter was built near their countryside home, surrounded by trees and wide green areas where the dogs could run and play freely. Christian and Scarlett oversaw every detail, from the sleeping areas for the dogs to the rehabilitation and recreation zones. They wanted it to be a place where the dogs would not only be provided with shelter, but also with love, care, and the opportunity for a fresh start. As Achilles House began operating, people from all over came not just to adopt but to share their stories, seeking that special connection only an animal can offer. Some came with broken hearts, others with invisible scars, and many left with a new reason to smile. Stories of rescue and redemption, both human and animal, started to spread, and the organization became a beacon of hope in the community. Christian regularly organized events to bring people and animals together, small gatherings where experiences were shared, and the power of love and loyalty was celebrated. Achilles, as always, moved happily among the guests, proud to be the symbol of a new life for so many. "I never imagined something like this could be possible," Christian confessed to Scarlett one afternoon as they watched the shelter full of life. "I feel more fulfilled than ever." Scarlett, with a warm smile, replied, "It's because you've learned to share the love you carry inside, Christian. And that love has transformed not only your life, but also the lives of everyone here." Over time, Achilles House became much more than just a shelter. It was a place where people and animals found second chances, where new families were created, and where kindness was shared freely. Christian, Scarlett, and Achilles lived happily in their home in the countryside, knowing that each day they made a difference, not only for the dogs they rescued, but also for the people who found new meaning in life through them. The future was full of promise, and as the sun set behind the hills, Christian knew, with complete certainty, that he had found his true purpose.